Hello, hello, everybody. Hello, 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 hello. It's great to be in Hudson. I'm happy to be here, and I'm here. I don't know, Billy Shaheen is here, my buddy, but he says real simply what you have to do in Delaware. You're only about 100, 200,000 people bigger than we are, larger, and everybody knows everybody. And so I want to make it clear, I'm here very simply to ask for your help. Ask, hey, Delaware, University of Delaware, all right, man. Good to see you. But ask for your help. And thank you, man. And I want to thank Senator Levesque. Thank you for your support. It's a big deal. It means a great deal to me that you be willing to stand up and do this. No, I really mean it. It means a great deal. And I want to thank you very, very much. And for all my friends that are here, I don't know if everybody's here, but I want to thank State Rep Bruce Cohen, David Cody, Mike O'Brien. I'm not sure if they were. I was told some would be here, some weren't able to be here. And Barbara Blue is an activist here, and also want to thank, the old expression, God made man, then he made some firefighters, then he made the president of firefighters, Jimmy McAllister. Hey, Jim. Good to see you guys and ladies. And also, Ambassador Terry Shoemaker is a great, great friend, Senator Betty Lasky and her husband, Elliot. Again, I don't know where everybody is, but I just want to say thank you, Jim. Thank you. Jim Demers is here. And so I just want to thank everybody. Look, the story Michelle tells is the reason why I got engaged in politics in the first place. You know, my dad used to have a saying, for real. He'd say, family's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And the way I look at how I think the Democratic Party should act and is acting again, I hope, that it's all about family. It's all about ordinary people like my mom and dad, like my brother and sisters, my sister and my brothers, who I was raised with. Ordinary people given half a chance being able to do extraordinary things, but never being put behind the eight ball where they didn't have a chance to get up, didn't have a chance to get back. And as I listened to you, Michelle, I thought about, you had the same thoughts I had when Bo came home. They told me that when they diagnosed this condition coming home after being in Iraq for a year, I said, what do we do? He said, go home and love him. I said, what was he going to do? And I said he was going to run for governor. He was the attorney general of the state. He came back from Iraq, a war hero, a Bronze Star, Conspicuous Service Medal, and many other things, and diagnosed with a terminal illness, stage 4 glioblastoma. And so we asked the docs at MD Anderson. I hadn't thought of this for a while until you said it. What do you do? They said, what was he going to do? I said he was going to run for governor. No one's even going to run against him. He was so popular. And they said, well, have him go home and run for governor. Go home and run. I said, but Doc, you told me there's really nothing out there yet. He said, no, but there's always hope. There's always hope. And I do remember, Michelle, you brought it back, that thinking to myself that without the Affordable Care Act, what would have been able to happen, no matter what insurance I had, that they gave him just months, and he outlived the time. He lasted 14 months and a lot of pain. And I kept thinking to myself, for real, what the hell would I do if, in fact, the insurance company we hadn't changed the law, and the insurance company could come in and say, you've run out of your coverage now. Live the last 6 months of your life in pain on your own. A lot of people face that. A lot of Americans all over the country have gone through things like that. And It's not, I don't mean it's about me. I had a lot of help. I don't mean to, people have gone through a lot more than I've gone through. And without the kind of help and family and friends that I had. But I just want to make it clear that, one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about protecting and expanding Obamacare is because I've watched my own family, how it works. And how many of you in here have lost someone to a terminal disease, particularly cancer, a loved one? Raise your hand. Almost every audience I ever speak to in the country, you know it. That's why I started. That's why the president allowed me to run a thing called, when we decided we were going to focus on cancer, on what we're going to do. And that's why after I got out, I've started the Biden Foundation on cancer to do it, because there's a lot of things we can do. We can change many of these 204 strains of cancer that exist out there and do chronic diseases. We can cure many of them. We got to invest the time and money. But most of all, what I found, and you found, Michelle, is you got to have hope. You got to have hope. And it does spring eternal, because every day they're finding cures for diseases that are not anticipated would happen. But it happens. It turned the corner. And so, folks, the thing I care about and like about Michelle, beyond her tenacity, she's also a school psychologist. And she knows that there's a number of, we now only have in America one school psychologist for every 1,507 kids. All the experts say you need at least one for somewhere between 500 and the high number 700 kids, because they can pick out everything. And we need more school nurses. We need to double the number of school psychologists and school nurses, because they can detect things early on that families aren't able to pick up, particularly if you're in a low-income circumstance where it doesn't matter your color, your background, your race, but where a lot less money is spent in that school, where people coming from more distressed backgrounds economically. So that's why I double the number of money for so-called Title I schools, because you can detect in a kid, everybody has figured out, school psychiatrists and psychologists can tell you, it is not, drug abuse is not caused by, mental illness does not cause drug abuse. Drug abuse causes mental illness. Mental illness is caused not by drug abuse. It occurs. It causes drug abuse. And so when you can identify early on a kid, you can tell when they're 3, 4, or 5 years old, you can pick it up. And you can help them with the anxiety they feel that results in behaviors that, in fact, are beyond their control. And so school nurses, I don't know how many of you have lived in districts where you have to make a choice between you're going to hire a few more school teachers, or you're going to hire a few more school nurses, or school psychologists, or social workers. Because, folks, here's what worries me the most about what's going on. What's going on now is we have a president who just doesn't think in terms of people. He doesn't think in terms of individuals. I've been all over this country and all over this state. The thing about you all up here in New Hampshire is you all basically know one another. You know your neighbors. You can sense when things are wrong. You can sense when things are out of control. And I think what's happened is the American character, the very character of this country, is on the ballot today. It's going to be decided in 2020 in November. It's about who we are as a people. What do we care about? What are the reasons why we're doing what we're doing? What are the laws we're seeking to pass? What's the purpose of them? How much are they going to cost? And are you going to be able to get it done? Well, folks, as I've gone around this state and around the nation, working on rope lines and people coming up to me, I was in Claremont about a week ago, I guess it was. And a guy walks up to me and says, "Can I talk to you?" And he was very nervous. And I said, "Well, yeah, why don't you, I'll go through this rope line, say hello to people." And I had staff take him in the back. And I walked back with him, and he was shaking. He said, "I'm going to lose my job. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell my family. We're not going to be able to live in our house. We're going to lose our house. What are we going to do? What do I do?" And I thought it was interesting. He asked me why he thought, what could he do? And I told him a story because I guess he had heard it. I said it before. When I was a kid, my dad had to make the same decision. My dad, I remember walking up what I call the longest walk a parent ever has to make, up a short flight of stairs to tell their child, you can't live here anymore. We got to move. Daddy or mommy doesn't have a job. You're going to go home and live with grandpa or grandmama if you have one. And it's going to take time. My dad made that walk in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he told us, but he said, everything's going to be okay, Joey, because he believed it would be. He believed in those days, back in the 50s, that in fact, if he got just given half a chance, he could make it. As long as he moved to a place where there were jobs, he could do it. He moved back to Delaware, where he lived when he was from 3rd grade to 11th grade. And he got a job. It took him about 3 years to be able to buy a house for us. But we finally got a house, a 3-bedroom house, 4 kids, and a grandpop living with us. And but it was okay. But he believed it today. How many of your neighbors who have had to make that long walk, or you know who made that long walk, or any of you have made that long walk, how many of you out there know them to be able to say it's going to be okay? They don't think it's going to be okay anymore because they look around. The working class is getting clobbered. The bottom's fallen out of the middle class. We're no longer the wealthiest middle class in the world. The majority of the people who are listed as middle class think their children will never have the same standard of living they will have. What's wrong with us? What's going on now? What's this all about? What is, Woodrow Wilson said, a party's worth that, no more than that for which it stands. What do we stand for? I thought it was about making sure that people, good, hard-working, decent people, got an even shot. Well, they're not getting an even shot now. And I see it all the time. All the time, people coming up to me. Even the press who used to kid me and say, well, he's hugging women. Well, guess what? They're hugging me, but they're not hugging me because they love me. They're hugging me because they're frightened. Even the press has overheard the thousands or the hundreds of stories I've been told. I have a problem. A woman walked up to me not long ago. Actually, it was a man who gave me a hug. His name was Gene. Gene was up he had terminal cancer here in your state. And I said, Gene, what are you doing here? He said, I have prostate cancer. It's terminal. I can't make it. He said, I've had my shock back to life 8 times because of cardiac issues in addition. And I said, why are you here? You should be taking care of yourself. And his response was that he said, I'm here because I got to have some purpose. Got to have some purpose. And he went through and he told me what was happening. And he said, but thank God, at least I have some coverage. But this is a guy with his wife who said, you got to have purpose. I'm in trouble. I have stage 4 cancer. And he's not going to make it. Do you think the president even knows those people exist out there? You're thinking there's thousands, tens of thousands. He don't even talk about it. We don't have a discussion about it. Or I was introduced I guess it was 4, 5, 6 days ago. I can't even remember now. I'm losing track of time. By a woman named Chrissy. I was in Concord. And she introduced me, and I hadn't met her before. And she told a tale of being victimized by her husband, being battered mentally and physically by him. And the only way she could get out with her young baby, her young child, son, was to leave the house. She was homeless for a long time, living out of a car, didn't know what to do. She said, then I got some hope. I saw a newspaper saying there's a guy named Biden. It's not just about me. It's well beyond that. A guy named Biden who was writing this thing called the Violence Against Women Act. And you get housing. You realize the vast majority of children who are on the street are there because their mothers are battered women? Do you realize the other portion of those are kids who are kicked out of their own homes because they're gay or lesbian, not accepted by their family? There's your children. And then she went on to talk about how she was able to make it and how she worked her way through and how she got back. But here we are. As I speak to you, the very law I wrote as my sister kids me with my own paw, my own hand, the Violence Against Women Act, which no one wanted to support initially. And we got it done. It's changing the lives of people. But guess what? It's in the, no, well, thank you, but that's not why I say it. But here's the point. Because of Trump and the gun lobby, it may be over. It has to be reauthorized. It's passed the House overwhelmingly. It's in the United States Senate sitting on McConnell's desk. You know why they won't pass it? Because I had put in provisions saying that an abuser can't own a weapon. If he's got a stay order to stay away from his wife or his girlfriend or whomever he has abused, he cannot own a weapon. He should be denied. Well, guess what? But here's the point. I was able to get that passed for everybody except there's a boyfriend exception. If you didn't have a baby by the abuser, if you weren't married to the abuser, just a boyfriend abusing you, he wasn't denied the right to own a gun. Well, guess what? Most women die in those circumstances by getting their brains blown out by someone holding a gun. And it's being held up because Trump is owned by the NRA. They will not let it pass. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. One more example. 2 days ago in Manchester. Actually, not 2 days ago, Saturday. It seems like 2 days ago. Saturday. Jill and my 2 young grandchildren, my deceased son's children, were up with me. We were at Feed the Children program in Manchester, standing in a barren parking lot with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, handing out bread, food. Little kids. It was 22 degrees and the wind was blowing hard. It was cold as hell. And people standing in line, about the number of people are on this whole side. Women and children being handed boxes so they could walk along the long line of tables where we're standing there handing out bread and food. Little kids couldn't even pick the boxes up. They're kicking them along. I remember saying to one, take an extra loaf. No, I don't need an extra loaf. I don't need an extra loaf. Some of them might need it. And this President of the United States, as I speak, is cutting SNAP food stamps. What in God's name is happening to us? This is the United States of America. And it makes me angry. The idea that in a country as wealthy as we are, you got kids. One of the organizers, they do it rain or shine. God love them, this Feed the Children program. They're incredible. And guess what? It was so cold, when one of the organizers came and gave me a cap, a stocking cap. And I looked at it and I saw this little kid, not any older than this handsome young man, in a sweater, no gloves, freezing. I'm thinking, what in God's name is going on? I did what you did. I gave the hat to him. But there's so much more. So much more needs to be done. And what are we doing? We're cutting food stamps? It's now called the SNAP program? Folks, there's so much wrong that's so easy to fix. You in New Hampshire, you know one another. You can feel the pain of your next door neighbor. You know it's happening sometimes. And you reach out. You're not distant. Well, folks, this election, America's character is on the ballot. The character of the people running is on the ballot. And folks, we got to take this country back in a bad, bad way. You know, all these problems are within our capacity to solve without hurting anybody. without denying anybody an opportunity to make a lot of money. We have over $1.6 trillion in tax loopholes, money not collected. We give people breaks for racehorses. What are we doing? What are we doing? And folks, look, this isn't the America that I was raised in. Being led by a president who has no empathy, no compassion, doesn't demonstrate a shred of decency. I really mean this. This is not about Republican, Democrat. This is way beyond that. Way beyond that. When I saw Colonel Vindman being physically escorted, a hero, physically escorted out of the White House by guards, when I saw all those people, the high-ranking people that testified before the House under oath and answered honestly, no, Biden didn't do anything wrong. Biden's an honorable man, and said they're all being lined up, fired. I mean, fired as we speak. Read the papers today. Listen to the news. Against the advice of all those political advisors. This is venomous. Folks, this isn't the America. When this president commented on those warriors in Iraq who were at the other end of the missile attack from Iran in a senseless encounter he started, and diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, said they're just headaches. This is a guy who stood before our flag officers and our generals in the Pentagon and called them to their face losers, babies. This is a guy who, in fact, embraces white supremacists. When a young woman was killed down in Charlottesville, when those folks, close your eyes, remember what you saw. Folks walking out of fields carrying torches, their veins bulging, shouting anti-Semitic sayings, the same ones that were shouted in Germany in the 30s, accompanied by white supremacists, a young woman who gets killed. And they asked him to come, and he said, there were very fine people on both sides. This is a guy who bows down to Vladimir Putin, says before the whole world, oh, I believe Putin. He had no reason to do anything in our election. Why would he do that after 18 intelligence agencies told him they did? Talk about women in degrading terms that he does, demeaning, demonizing, making fun of people with disabilities, mimicking them. Look, this is the America I know. This is the American I believe in. You know, I know we talk about losing. Well, guess what? Like many of you, I've lost a lot in my lifetime. I lost a wife and a daughter in a car accident. I lost my son, cancer. But I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and lose my country. It will not happen. Period, period, period. It will not happen. So, folks, it's time to stand up and get rid of the hate and the division. You know, I'm going to stop talking because I want to hear what's on your mind. I'll answer your questions. But, folks, there's nothing we cannot do if we do it together. I swear to God. I'm more optimistic if we get rid of this guy about our ability to put this country back together on a new path, that we can lead the country and the world again in a way we haven't had a chance in a long time. But why don't I, as my mother was here, she'd say, Joey, hush up and take some questions. Anybody got questions, raise your hand. Do we have folks with mics around here? Well, I mean with, oh.
Thank you for coming to New Hampshire to speak with us. I am undecided. I love you a lot, but I am undecided.
You sound like my old girlfriend. I love you, but
So, you know, I was very impressed with the debate. I thought everybody did a great job. I'm afraid that one of you cannot beat him. So I think all of you could. And is there some way that you guys could put a dream team together and present that to the American people and just say, you know, Amy's going to be vice president and we'll put Andrew in charge of commerce, you know, something like that, that we could get a whole vision to take him down.
Well, you know, there's two ways to be in the dream team: run it or be picked. Look, it'd be very presumptuous of me to tell you what I do, but I promise you that the only thing I know a lot about is the vice presidency, and I think you've seen, and literally the overwhelming majority of presidential and vice presidential historians in the last 3 years have said there's been no team that's been closer personally and politically than Barack and I have been. I mean, for real. I mean, it's not. But here, I say that for this reason. So I can tell you that there's only a couple things I can tell you for certain. And that is, if I'm your nominee and I become president, because if I'm your nominee, I will beat him. But my administration will look like the country. It'll be made up of women and blacks and browns and people that represent the diversity of the country, just like our administration did. And there are at least 6 women I can think of at the top of my head who I wouldn't have a moment's hesitation in asking to be my vice president or the nominee. I can say the same thing for at least 4 leading African Americans that I know. And so the list goes on. But the one thing I do know that a president has to have and a vice president is a president has to have somebody, and this is why it works so well with Barack and me, who not only you trust, but with whom you're simpatico, with whom you agree substantively on all the major issues. Because the role of a president in the 21st century is not able to be handled by a single man or woman. They can't do it all. Too many things land on your desk that, in fact, require you to be able to assign significant portions to somebody else. You can't do it to a cabinet member. They can be enormously helpful. We had great cabinet members in our administration. But you have to have somebody who you can give presidential authority to. For example, when we were about to lose the vote on the $900 billion Recovery Act, no program has ever been passed that big in all of history, $900 billion. And I had made the mistake of writing a memo to the president of how I thought we should handle that when we had a private lunch once a week, and he took the memo and slid it back to me. He said, "Okay, do it." It's the last memo I wrote for him. Anyway, but all kidding aside, remember he used to love at States of the Union addresses say, without telling me first, he'd say, "And now this $900 billion bill we're going to get passed, I'm going to ask Sheriff Joe to run it." And he thought that was really funny, you know. But here's the point. He didn't have the votes to get it passed, so he sent me, and I was able to change the votes of 3 Republicans, and we got it passed. And literally saved the economy. But it's not about me. He had the confidence in me to know he and I agreed and he could trust me to run the day-to-day operation. I spoke to well over 150 mayors, governor. I spoke to everybody as to how it had to be implemented. It wasn't just, you can't do it anymore and just say, have the bureaucrats, and they're all good, run it. So I would call for example, a mayor would say, "Mr. Mayor, you're going to get X $1 million to improve the lighting in your city and be able to hire back your teachers." And he said, "Great." And I said, "But you got to use modern lighting that in fact has significant greater lasting power and uses less energy." He said, "I don't like that." And he said, "But the law says I can do it." I said, "Let me tell you, if you do it, here's what I'm going to do. My word." I said, "I'm coming out and holding a press conference saying you're wasting money." He said, "You wouldn't do that." I said, "Try me." Well, guess what? They put it in. Or, for example, there was another one saying we're going to improve employment, and they said, "Well, I want to set up a Frisbee park." I said, "No." He said, "I can do it." I said, "No, you can't." I said, "Because it doesn't pass the smell test. is legally able, but you can't do it because I'm going to come out and do. And so we ran a program that had less than 0.1%, less than 1% waste or fraud. The largest program ever run. The point I'm making is not that I'm so good, but you got to be able to give somebody presidential power. I was able to hire, I was able to fire, I was able to task anybody in the administration to do what I needed to do. So that's the first thing for me, to be completely honest with you, in terms of if I'm the nominee picking the vice president, that I have to understand they're on the same page. There's a lot of other things they could do that they don't have to be not being vice president. For example, well, I won't get any examples, I'll get in trouble. But there's a lot of people who are running now. I wouldn't hesitate a second to ask to be part of a cabinet or to take on a high position in the White House. I mean, not a second. Not a second. And lastly is that, you know, the next president of the United States is going to inherit a divided country. We're divided now, especially after the impeachment proceeding, and a nation in disarray, an international relationship in disarray. They're going to have to know on day one there's not going to be a lot of time for on-the-job training. But one of the things we can do is we can, in fact, first unify the Democratic Party. That's going to have to come even before unifying the nation. And if you remember, the beginning of this primary campaign, or this, well, including the caucuses, I was the guy always talking, well, we got to unify the party, unify the country. They say you can't unify the country. How many times you hear everybody on the first 5 debates, Biden, he doesn't understand these guys. You can't unify the country. You can't reach out to Republicans and get them to cooperate. Well, guess what? If we can't, we're dead. Because we need consensus to get anything done. And I've done it. And they say, well, Biden's done it before, but not anymore. He doesn't know this new Republican Party. I know them better than anybody. I've been the object of their affection for a long time. A long time. But we can and we have. Now everybody's talking about unity, thank God. If I've done nothing else, I've got the entire cast running for President of the United States, the Democratic side. We have to unify the country. Well, remember before, just 3 months ago, we can't unify the country. Biden's pipe dreaming. We can do this. We can do this, and we will first have to begin by unifying the party, and I believe we can do that, and I'm determined to do that. I don't know why I called on you. You've asked 20 questions already, but you're a good man. This guy, well, I won't tell you about him yet, but go ahead.
I'm from Iowa, and I have followed Joe Biden, Vice President, since 2007. And in 2008, I voted for President Obama. Last Tuesday, in Iowa, I voted for Joe Biden. And this is our future proven leader of the United States. And I have about 10 volunteers from Iowa to working for you in Salem today. And also that my question is that in the last 10 years, the U.S. Congress has not been effectively doing anything for gun control. I have 2 boys, graduate from Iowa high school and colleges. And I want to ask you that in your first 10 days, what kind of executive orders you want to do to have effectively gun control to make the school safety zones?
All right. By the way, he's a professor. He has an awful lot of students, and I didn't want you, that's not a setup. I didn't pick him to stand up and ask the question, but thank you for, it's a good question though. But it's, what do I do about safety in schools and rational gun policy? Well, look, folks, I'm going to say something. Everybody has ideas about what to do about a rational gun policy. There is a Second Amendment, and you do have a right to bear arms, but not an unlimited right. No amendment is absolute. I own a 20-gauge shotgun. I own a 12-gauge shotgun. I'll answer your question in a minute, sir. I own a 20-gauge and a 10-gauge shotgun. I just skeet shoot. I don't even hunt. My sons are hunter. They bird hunt. You know, we protect, by the way, geese crossing the international boundary more than we do people. You can only have 3 shells in your shotgun if you're going goose hunting. Okay? But you can have 100 rounds in a magazine that you can buy today. So I'm the only person who's ever beat the NRA nationally. I beat them flat out twice. I'm the guy that got the Brady bill passed. That is the background check bill. I even had Democrats are on the stage who voted against the Brady bill. It's wrong. The Constitution doesn't say anybody can own a weapon. It says only certain people can own weapons. If you are incapable of thinking, or you're mentally ill, you can't own a weapon. If you're a terrorist, you can't own a weapon. You shouldn't be able to own a weapon if you're an abuser, so on and so forth. There's never been a limit on that anybody could own a weapon, period. And by the way, those who say the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots, a great line. Well, guess what? The fact is, if you're going to take on the government, you need an F-15 with Hellfire missiles. There's no way an AK-47 is going to take care of you if you're going to take on, you're worried about the government coming down, knocking down your door. And so it's bizarre. We never said you could own any weapon at all from the beginning. You can't own a machine gun. You can't own a bazooka. You can't own an M1 tank. No matter how much money you have, you can limit the kind of weapons that are able to be owned. And so I think, and by the way, all the work I've done on this, including in our administration, I now have over 58% of the NRA members acknowledging you can't own an assault weapon. There's no need for it. You can't have a magazine that has more than 10 rounds in it. And I'll do it again, because here's what happens. Talk about moral depravity. These beautiful young kids that are here, and I hope I'm not saying too much with them here, but these kids that are here, when you sent those children to school in kindergarten or first grade this year, second, third, fourth grade, what's the first thing they learned to do? Well, it used to be, when we worried about fires in schools, is drop, roll, and cover. Now it's duck and cover. Literally, train to duck and cover. Run down the hallway zigzagging. Talk about loss of a soul. Why? Because we're unwilling to have a rational policy. It says you cannot have 20, 30, 40, 50 clips in a weapon. I visited all those parents, literally, all those parents up in Connecticut when those kids were killed. And I visited every mass shooting. And guess what? What's left behind is devastating. Devastating. Not just the loss of life, which is horrible. Nothing worse than losing a child. But in addition to that, the psychological damage that's done. These kids. The single greatest concern people have, the Generation Z, they call it, 7 to 17 years old. The single greatest concern they have? Literally. Rated by the Harvard Institute, it's on a scale to 1 to 5, 5 being extreme, getting shot in school. And every single day in America, there's a mass shooting that occurs on our streets in our cities, in tough neighborhoods, that we don't even talk about. And so much of it can be prevented. So much. And I'll say one last thing that's critical. I was one of those guys hollering we should go after the drug companies on the opioid crisis. We not only should go after them, we should put in some of the CEOs in jail, not just in jail. Because they know, for example, fentanyl can be addictive in 5 days. You ever see that advertised on television? You ever see when they're advertising these drugs? Well, guess what? Imagine if we couldn't sue them. They had an exemption. They couldn't be sued. Well, that's the exact exemption we've given gun manufacturers. All the havoc they have caused, you cannot sue them. The only major industry in America given an exemption voted for by the Congress, signed by a Republican president, saying you cannot sue them. How many thousands of lives have been lost? Thousands of lives have been lost in the last 15 years to gun violence in America. And by the way, you know what the single greatest cause of death from a gun is? Suicide. Suicide. And so, folks, I'm going to change that law. I'm going to work like heck to make sure that gets changed. Because one thing to get their attention is say, I'm going to hold you responsible for the carnage you're keeping. Sir, you had a question. Sure. Thank you for your service.
You're quite welcome. It's my honor to do so.
close to Dad.
Okay. Well, first of all, on behalf of myself and my family and everybody here, please accept the condolences of everybody for your losses and Dr. Biden's losses that you've experienced.
So many other people have had greater losses, Dad, but thank you. You're very kind.
Thank you for being here. I'm 92 years old.
I want to see your license. I don't believe it.
I don't have one. I've been, all my life, I haven't been a politician. I was born in 1928, so we didn't, my family, we never talked about politics and stuff like that. But I always had a feeling that there was always a check and balance that prevented someone like our current president from doing what he is doing and doing what he wants to do. And I'm not going to ask you a question. I'm going to say, when you become president, I want you to reinforce the checks and balances that prevent that from happening. Because I got scared a little bit a couple months ago when I said to myself, good God, this could possibly happen, and we're not going to let it happen. So from that standpoint on, sir, I appreciate it, and I wish you luck. Go Joe.
Semper Fi, man. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you wonder why they're called the greatest generation in American history. Thank you, Dad. Let's give him an applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know you didn't stand up for that reason, Dad, but you deserve it. You deserve it, and you've done so much. Look, I'll answer the question directly. The balance of power, I taught constitutional law for 22 years, and I taught a course that was a 3-credit course, a seminar in separation of powers. What powers were appropriated by, what powers were awarded to the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. And there's a great line. It says that the Constitution gave an invitation to each branch to compete for the power that they want to exercise. So it's a two-way street. The first thing there's hope for, and the founders didn't count on it, but was the good judgment, integrity, and honesty of elected people. They wouldn't abuse the power they had. But they didn't count on that. That's why they set up the separated powers. Now, but that requires each branch to exercise and fight for their power when it's being abused. So it's one thing for the President of the United States to overreach in his power, which he has clearly done, exceeded that of any modern president. That's not hyperbole. That's a fact. That's a fact. But the Senate and the House were designed to put a check. I'll answer your questions, guys, in a minute, okay? Put a check on the abuse of power by either of the other branches. But the Senate and the House have refused to do that until we finally changed the leadership of the last House and elected a Democratic House. Now you have, I was proud to serve in the United States Senate for 36 years. I got elected there when I was 29 years old. I come from a modest background, but here's the point. And I've written extensively on the separation of powers in terms of war powers and the power to appoint justices. And I've written a number of law review articles on it, and I helped write the War Powers Act. But here's the deal. It requires it being enforced when a president abuses it. And this Senate has embarrassed me, an institution I had great hope and faith in, has embarrassed me. I'm a Democrat. We don't have a lot of Warren Rudmans down there anymore. We don't have a lot, whether you voted for him or not. He was an honest, honorable man who exercised the Senate power. We don't have a lot of people that I served with over the years, like Dick Lugar in Indiana, a Republican. We don't have a lot of people who have the nerve to stand up. I got a call from Dick's wife when he passed, and I was talking to her. He said he wanted to do one thing. If he lived long enough, he's going to vote for Joe Biden. Well, I'd vote for him versus this guy, too, if I had a choice. Look, they have to exercise the power given to them. And they could have easily have done it in this impeachment trial. But they withered because this guy has such an absolute venomous streak in him. They know he will go after them no matter what till hell won't have it, win or lose. That's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. But here's the deal. The Senate and the House have to exercise their power. That's why the single most important reason my wife wanted me to run this time for president, and she wasn't the one wanting to get into this to begin with, is because of the courts, what's happening to the federal courts, the Supreme Court. We're appointing people to the court through the Senate by this president that, in fact, who interpret the Constitution. I don't want to get too complicated here. You'll understand it. But look, there's a school of thought, very conservative school of thought that says, unless a power is explicitly enumerated, stated in the Constitution, that a right is physically stated in the Constitution, it does not exist. It's not constitutionally guaranteed. It has to be legislated. For example, there's nowhere in the Constitution where it uses the word women. There's nowhere in the Constitution where you use the word choice. There's nowhere in the Constitution where it says things that, in fact, are obviously, clearly your right. That's one of the reasons why the founders initially didn't want to have a Bill of Rights. Those amendments called the Bill of Rights. The reason was they're afraid they'd leave something out and it would be interpreted as not having meant to be protected in the first place. I don't want to turn this into a constitutional law class, but last point I'll make. That's why they had a Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment basically says anything not stated here is retained by the people, a right retained by the people. And so what we have a court now that's saying, unless you explicitly state it in the Constitution, there's no constitutional statement about a right of a woman in the Constitution. We got a 13th Amendment on African Americans. But think about it. So we've bastardized, I mean this term in a literal sense, we bastardized the Constitution as it relates to the courts as of late, as well as the United States Senate. And that's why my concluding comment is this. It's not enough for the next nominee of the Democratic Party to win and be able to beat Donald Trump. They have to be able to help senators win and take back the Senate, too.
Sir, we have time for one more question. We have time for one more.
There's a mic over there. Well, there's something going to jump out of her sweater over there. That young man has a question, I guess. Hang on, we'll get your mic.
I'm concerned about the amount of plastic being used, and I was wondering, because what happens is it gets into the fish's body and then we eat the fish, so it's basically hurting everybody in the country. So I was wondering, as president, how will you affect that? How will you help that?
That's a really good question, kiddo. There's millions of pounds of plastics being dumped in the oceans. Millions of pounds. And I think what we should do, just like we did with plastic bottles and things, I think there should be a requirement. Most states, a lot of states do it, we should do it federally, that there have to be a deposit on the bottle so that you're going to pay more for that bottle of water, for example, in a plastic container, unless you return it and get your money back for the plastic bottle. That encourages people not to. I don't think we should be using plastic straws anymore in restaurants. I don't think we should be doing. So there's a lot of things we can do. And one of the reasons a long time ago when I was a young senator, I wrote a law that ended up becoming what they call the Coastal Zone Act, saying, because I watched what was happening all along the Delaware River, which is even wider than the Mississippi, and that in fact all the shell life and all the life along the estuary there was being wiped out because we were building plants and we were building facilities. And we ended up passing a law saying you could not build anything at all within a mile of the Delaware River, because in fact it would cause plant species as well as life species to be eliminated. We have a lot of problems now with the loss of an awful lot of plant and animal material that are in the waters as well as in the forest, in the air. The butterflies are dying, bumblebees are dying, and so and that means we're in real trouble. That's why the single most important thing we have to do is deal with the thing called climate change. It's the single most important issue facing the United States of America. But maybe I can talk to you a little bit after this, okay? If you have a second. I don't want to have you wait around too long, but I'll be happy to talk with you more about all of this if you like. But we should eliminate the use and transition away from the use of plastics. That's why an awful lot of supermarkets, now, are giving you, going back to the old paper bags or giving you canvas carry-out bags that you bring in and you, in fact, get your orders in.
We have time for one more.
Okay? I got. Oh, I'm sure hers is important too. I can undo every executive order he has done immediately, and it's going to start. It's going to start with the environment. Methane is a problem. Pardon me? I'll get the immigration, and I'm happy to talk to you about that too. I've got it. Okay? There's a lot to talk about, so I'll try to give shorter answers here.
Group of friends because we support Pete Buttigieg, but we wanted to learn about all the candidates. I am originally from the island of Puerto Rico. You know that island that is separated by big waters, where over 3.4 million Americans live at? An island that went through a hurricane 2 years ago that has been trembling since December 23 and hasn't stopped. An island that voted to become a state. I want to know, because I haven't heard Pete speak about Puerto Rico. I haven't heard Bernie speak about Puerto Rico. I haven't heard any candidate talk about their plans. I want to know, what do you plan to do for Puerto Rico?
By the way, I've done a lot for Puerto Rico because, number one, Puerto Rico is in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, the same as Delaware. It's part of that. I've been to Puerto Rico many, many times, number one. That's starter. Number two, I was able to help pass legislation giving Puerto Rico a significant opportunity to get a benefit of having employment moved to Puerto Rico to provide manufacturing capacity in Puerto Rico. Number three, my wife headed up Save the Children program and had thousands of people, hundreds of people in Puerto Rico after the hurricane working there to try to help. Number four, this president doesn't even know that Puerto Ricans are citizens. They're citizens of the United States. Number five, I'm fully aware of the law that says, most of you may not know, right now, there's a law that exists. If the people of Puerto Rico vote, they have three options, if and when they vote. One, they can vote for independence. They can vote for continued status, or they can vote for statehood. I got in trouble because I said, I hope they vote for statehood, but whatever they vote for, as President of the United States, I would fully support, completely support. And I've spent a lot of time down there with your previous governors. I know the island really well. And the fact of the matter is, you have to understand, Puerto Rico is and can be a thriving community. And by the way, the largest population in Delaware is Puerto Rican. Delaware, Puerto Rican, okay? And that's why I've had such overwhelming support from the Puerto Rican community, because they, in fact, are the Hispanic, but they're citizens, Hispanic population in the state of Delaware up to the 2020 census, which means the largest increase of Hispanics in America is in Delaware, the largest percentage increase, now 14%. My generic point is that the contribution is enormous that can be made, and the investment should be significant, and we should do more than throw paper towels at people when you show up. Yes, sir.
Our bets. Bill Clinton picked Al Gore, and they unseated a Republican and made him a one-term president. What if Hillary had picked Bernie Sanders as a running mate? Trump would have never beaten him. Barack Obama picked Joe Biden as a running mate. Why not pick your running mate from the top 5 finishers in this Democratic race? I see more agreement than I do disagreement. We have to beat Donald Trump. Our country is at stake. Our values are at stake. The evolution, the planet is at stake. There's so many things at stake. You embody all the important things in this country. You get it. You know what's going on. Why not build on our strengths and pick a running mate from the top finishers? Barack Obama did the same thing with you, and look where you are today. So when you win, will you consider that? I think that's how we got to beat Donald Trump. Job one. I hate the man. I hate him. And I pray to God, the dear Lord, to control the rage inside of me of how much he's taken away. I lived through Richard Nixon and all that other stuff, and this man is worse. So we need to pull together. What do you think, Joe? I'm trusting you. Help me, Joe. Save our country, Joe.
I think there's two things.
No,
you're right. You're right. First thing, if I answer this question directly, you're going to have every news person saying Biden is being presumptuous, telling the other candidates that who he's going to pick. That's number one. I ain't looking for that. But number two, let's be honest about it. It's going to be very important, even though I think I'm in pretty good shape, and I know I can take Trump physically and mentally. But all kidding aside, no, and they're going to say I challenge Trump. I not challenge him to fight at anything. I challenge him to a golf game if he carries his own bag. And anyway, but all kidding aside, I have to pick somebody who, in fact, reassures people that if tomorrow lightning strikes and I die, and I've released all my medical records, and I'm in, well, I don't want to jinx myself, as my mother said, knock on wood, I'm in great shape. But my point is, I've got to pick somebody who everybody looks at and meets 2 criteria. One, that they are younger than I am. No, I'm not being facetious. And number 2, that they are ready on day one to be President of the United States of America. And there has to be some correlation between their views and mine. For example, if I pick someone who had a view that they insisted that we do Medicare for all, which cost over $35 trillion, and has no chance of becoming law, and would not support my plan for Medicare Medicare for those who want it, building on Obamacare and adding a public option, that'd be a real problem. How do you do those kinds of things? But there are at least 4 people running that, in fact, are simpatico with where I am, starting with Indiana and starting with other places. I'm not, and don't read that as Biden thinks I'm getting in trouble here. Anyway. But yes, and there are a number of people who have run and have dropped out already, who are completely capable and competent to being a vice president or a secretary of defense or secretary of state or a national security advisor, et cetera. The one good thing that I do have that I will be able to announce is I have more major national security people, over 300 of them, with credentials, and both parties have already endorsed me. So I'm not going to have any problem filling the State Department and the Defense Department and the intelligence agencies, because these folks have overwhelmingly endorsed me, and they're ready to go. They're already working. I'm not being facetious. because you can't wait around till you decide you have the nomination and then start to figure out how you put a transition team together. I'm not being presumptuous. Please don't. This is complicated stuff, and you can read it the wrong way. But there is need to, in fact, not just to unite the party, because there's people of real caliber. And it helps if, in fact, you've already had a good look at them and you know what, in fact, who they are, what they can do, what they can't do. And I think that's a rational position. Thank you. Thank you.
Do I have to stand up? I just want to say one thing. I would like whoever is president, and I'm sure if you become president, you will make America proud again, because Mr. Trump is an embarrassment.
Mom, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. God love you. We come to you. Thank you. All right.
Oh, my God.
She came from Los Angeles.
Oh, God love you. Came from L.A. Holy mackerel. Well, I tell you what. Many of you have probably seen, at least older people have seen pictures of my mom. Tell me if she doesn't look like my mom. And by the way, my mom was the finest person that ever lived. I just want you to know that, but I'm serious. I guess you're right. Thank you, Mom. You're nice to say that. Somebody in the back, do we have a microphone over that side?
We have time
Okay,
for one last
we'll
question.
give it to one of these folks. You pick somebody. The lights are in my
Last
eyes. I can't
question.
see.
Hi, how are you tonight? Thank you so much for being here. Just a quick question about how you feel about drilling in the Arctic Refuge.
Totally opposed to it. Completely, totally
Excellent.
opposed to it. And I think I'm the only one, maybe not the only one running, who's been up in the Arctic Circle. Remember the great oil spill that occurred? And I watched when I went up there, and I went up in a helicopter up on the North Slope and saw what was going on and saw what was happening as the glaciers began to melt and how the caribou and everyone, there's a lot going on up there. And it's a real gigantic problem. And by the way, no more drilling on federal lands, period. Period, period, period. But the Arctic Circle is a disaster to do that. A big disaster, in my view.
Last question.
Well, let's take a couple more. I'm going to get in trouble.
Hi, Vice President Biden. Thank you for being here. You and President Barack Obama really restored our image after the Bush years. Over the past 3 years, Donald Trump has left this nation unsafe. He's unfit to be commander-in-chief, and our image across the world is really down on the drain right now. Could you just comment on how to make us safer, return to the Iran nuclear ban and the Paris Treaty, and just our image across the world? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Look, I'll do this real quickly. I said at the outset that next president is going to inherit a world in disarray. On day one, and this is not a criticism of any of the people who are running, okay? But on day one, I think if you, as we Catholics say when you go to confession, examine your conscience, if you actually are quietly think to yourself, on day one, the president-elect is going to have to be able to deal internationally. No on-the-job training. There's going to be no time for on-the-job training. It's not like any other time in modern history. And we're going to have to make sure that we're able to keep the alliances which are crumbling, put them back together again, number one. I've met every major world leader in the last 40 years, not because I'm important, because of the nature of the job I had. I had a job as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, being in that committee for over 40 years. And that's not true, 36 years. But the point is that I also, one of the reasons Barack picked me was because my background in national security and foreign policy. And I know all of these people. And so one of the things that it's important, the next president's going to have to, the day he or she stands behind that podium or in front of that desk, is going to have to speak, and the world leaders have to know who that person is and understand him or her. And he has to demonstrate he knows them. He knows them. I know Vladimir Putin. He knows I know him. I also know I spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has other than after we left office. And so I know these guys, and they know I know them. Barack used to always kid me because I'd always be quoting my mom or my dad to him about what they'd say. I'd say, all politics is personal, particularly foreign policy. You better darn well understand what the bottom line the other guy has or the other woman has. I don't expect anybody to voluntarily volunteer for the second editions of Profiles in Courage. You got to know where they are. You got to know what they stand for, good and bad. And so it's going to happen. And the first thing the president's going to have to do, I'll just tell you what I'd do if I got elected and it was tomorrow the election and I was the new president. I'd immediately be on the phone, not a joke, with our NATO allies saying, we're back. We keep our commitments. We're back. Not to go to war, to keep us from going to war. I would be on the phone and letting Erdogan, who I know as well as any world leader because I've spent as much time with him as anyone in Turkey. He's become an autocrat. He represents a democracy. He's become an autocrat. And what you have to do is you have to understand this is what we're going to do now. The game has changed. I would be on the phone to Abe in Japan, who I know well. I would be putting back together the alliance between South Korea and Japan and Australia because we need to. So I really mean it. These are things that I've done my whole career. And it's not because we're looking to go to war. We're looking to avoid going to war. Folks, look, the next president of the United States is going to have the ability to put together coalitions like I was able to do at the request of the president of 60 nations with very few American forces, special forces, to beat ISIS and prevent the caliphate from forming in Iraq and Syria. And what we did, you saw what this president did. He went ahead against the advice of his generals, against the advice of everyone in his administration. He made a deal with Erdogan of Turkey, withdrew our troops along that buffer zone. We had 10,000 Kurds were killed defeating ISIS. ISIS was coming for us. Remember what he said? He said, if in fact, this is what Erdogan said, in fact, if you put any sanctions on me, I'm going to let these people come through into Europe. Great ally, right? Well, look, what happened? Again, close your eyes. Remember that scene when all those Kurds, I can't, the number's classified, but it's fewer than 5,000 special forces were pulling out. You saw them in their vehicles pulling out. You saw those women holding up, the Kurdish women holding up their babies saying, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. What happened? You saw our military women and men with their heads down. They weren't going, go away. They were like, they were ashamed. Who's going to trust us? We made a sacred commitment to them and 65 other nations that were helping us do that. Who trusts us again unless we reassert our commitment? Barack and I knew the value of NATO. It was to prevent wars, not to start wars. And guess what? This president treats NATO like it's a protection racket. If you don't give more money on such and such, then we're not going to keep Article 5. Article 5 is a sacred commitment. It says, if one is attacked, it's an attack on all. That's why Russia doesn't do anything. So, folks, it's about preventing war. Preventing war. And it can't be something that's one-off. You've got to understand, and those other leaders have to know you. And I don't care how smart or brilliant you are, how good you are. You have to build relationships. You have to have relationships to get this done and get it done quickly because there's no time to wait. I tell you what, if Barack Obama was not the President of the United States I won't go into that. If this guy gets elected again, what's going to happen here is there will be no NATO in 4 years. And remember why NATO was put in place. NATO was put in place not just to keep a Soviet invasion of Western Europe from happening. It was put in place so you had 28 nations and no one nation could get so powerful that it overtook other nations. How do we get into those other world wars? We got into world wars because a European nation decided that it was more powerful than all the other nations, began to flex its muscle twice. That's how it happened. So what's this guy do? The European Union isn't an economic threat to the United States of America, for God's sake. We just whip them all the time economically. But to talk about getting rid of the EU was to make sure no one country was able to exercise power that dominated the rest. He doesn't have any idea of strategic doctrine or why we do what we do. So, folks, there's a lot to be done. By the way, you go to Tulane? Well, good. My daughter went there. Great school. Great school. It's very expensive, and I'm still paying for it. You all think I'm kidding. And then she went ahead and she decided she majored in social work and anthropology, and she then went to the University of Pennsylvania and graduated with honors with a master's degree in social work. And she now gets paid less money than the tuition cost. But she's a brilliant, wonderful kid. But it's a great school. Anyway, I'm going to make everybody mad here.
Hi, my name is Catherine Nestor.
Put their hand up. Well, come on, honey. What's your question?
Hi, my name is Catherine Nestor. My dad and I would like to thank you for the Affordable Care Act and for the mortgage lending, because that saved our house and it saved my life multiple times. So thank you so much.
God love you. Thank you.
I owe you my life multiple times over. But I also wanted to ask you about what you plan on doing for people with disabilities. I have multiple chronic illnesses, both physical and mental, and I'm on the autism spectrum.
A number of things. First of all, I'm really proud of you. God love you being able to stand up and ask that question and do it. Really and truly. I really mean it. Thank you. I can say three things, and I'll do it quickly, and then maybe you and I can talk afterwards and go into more detail, okay? Number one, in Obamacare, and it's going to be made even stronger in Obama amended by Biden with a public option, there is a requirement, as you know, that there has to be complete parity between mental health needs and physical health needs. They're no different. They're no different at all. And so the insurance company can't say to you, you have a mental health problem or we're not going to help out, only if you broke your arm or your back or your leg or you developed a disease. It is a disease of the brain. That's what it is. That's all it is, and they can be fixed. And so that's number one. There has to be absolute parity. One of the things I did, you saw that those guys and women called the Wounded Warriors that walked across America. My wife and I walked across America with them, not all of it. We walked in 3 sections with them across America. And the reason we did, you know what they were doing? They were trying to make the point that, in fact, there is nothing to be ashamed of seeking help for mental illness. Because today, many, many people think it's they don't want to acknowledge. I'll get you, I promise you, okay? And why don't you come out here, because they're going to be worried if I don't get you, and then you'll be the last question, okay? All right, but hang on a second. And so that reason we walked with them was that, for example, in the United States of America right now, we have an awful lot of people coming home from war who are, I carry a card with me every day, and it is my daily schedule. Look what I have on that black box in that schedule. What's it say? Unless you need your glasses. It says Daily U.S. Troop Update. What I make sure we check every single morning is the number of women and men killed in Afghanistan and Iraq and the number wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq, because every single one of those fallen angels left behind a community. And it's not roughly 6,900, 6,905, F-I-V-E. Every day we check, because they leave behind a whole community. But secondly, what's not on here is 300,000 vets over the last 12 years are coming home with traumatic, not just traumatic brain injuries, over 300,000 of them as well, but with traumatic coming home with PSD, post-traumatic stress. We're short 37,000 psychiatric nurses in our hospitals right now, today. You have 22 veterans per day committing suicide in the United States of America. 22. Retirees, veterans, or active duty. 22. It's a disgrace. We have to do so much about it. But the first thing we have to do, those guys like you with your pride and your spunk, those guys are trained, never complain, never explain. So the last thing they want to do is go in and say, I have these awful headaches, and I'm having these blinding headaches, and I'm having these dreams, and I'm having this, and I'm having that. So first we got to take away the stigma. The stigma. There should be no stigma dealing with mental health. In terms of, you know the law, I know you know it, other people may not, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We haven't funded it yet. I've been proposing for the last 3 years that we fund it completely fund the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is going to cost another $45 billion. Pardon me? What that does, it makes sure that all the needs of people with serious disabilities have access to the help they need, and it gets paid for. Not by them, but by the government. Paid for by the government. And also you have a situation where, if in fact you need additional help for whatever the problem is, including prescription drugs, they get significantly lowered under the proposal I have put forward. I really mean it, not a joke. For example, there's a thing called the German system, where any new drug that has an impact on a person's ability, whatever it is, mental or physical, has on their health, that drug has to be approved by a group of 25 people we're going to appoint at the Department of Health and Human Services. And they sit with the drug companies ahead of time, and in fact, they have an explanation from the drug companies what it costs them to develop that drug, and then they can make a lot of money off of that. They can make a profit just like utilities can make a profit, but they can't charge unlimited numbers, and the price will be set. If in fact they don't abide by the price that is set, then in fact they will not be able to move in a direction where what happens is you have Medicare making sure they negotiate for that drug, and they will not buy that drug, period, unless they have agreed to the price. That will significantly lower the prices, and drugs across the board that in fact people need. I had a son who, when he came home from Iraq, he came from Kosovo. He was over there, he's in the Balkans. He came home, and it turns out he was exposed to significant bacteria infection. And it turns out he had a marker for ankylosing spondylitis. Ankylosing spondylitis is, bamboo spine. You know what that is, okay? And you see people who are like this. The reason they can't straighten up is if they do, the vertebrae will crack. It fuses together. And there was an experimental drug that was on the market that he got into a study on. But he had to take a shot once a week for $5,000 a shot. He was an attorney general of a state making $102,000 a year, a lot of money. But that's all he had, $5,000 a week, until it got approved, and then it went on the market, and it was able to go on the market at a reasonable price. But my point is, the idea, there's people out there, I'll bet you know somebody who's paying an exorbitant amount of money for an inhaler that in fact, or an EpiPen, or anything else that in fact, when it started 2, 5, 10 years ago, I'm making this up, cost $1, now it costs $10. And under my proposal, you'll not be able to, and Republicans will vote for this, that in fact you cannot increase the price of a drug that's authorized beyond medical inflation unless you can prove something fundamentally was different and you invested in it to make it more effective. There's an awful lot more to talk about here, but the point is that it is critically important that we engage in and provide for the needs of people who in fact have disabilities and also have mental health problems. It's overwhelmingly in the country's interest. Everybody's better off, including a program we put together for employment that in fact for people who are able to be employed to the degree they're employable. There's ways in which, because everybody wants to contribute. Nobody wants to just be given anything. They want to contribute. And you can, and you obviously already are. Again, there's a lot more to say, but if I don't get this young man here, I'm dead, and my staff's going to kill me because I'm keeping all of you so long. Hi.
Hi. I met you in Derry, and I wanted you to ask Trump, weaken the Endangered Species Act. Would you strengthen it, and if so, how much?
Well, God love you.
That's a great question, isn't it?
It's a great question. Here the question, he said, Trump, he met me in Derry, and Trump, you came twice. God love you. That's all right. Hey, man. And he's weakened the Endangered Species Act. Would I change that? And if I'd strengthen it, how would I do it? The answer is I would, in fact, strengthen it. And the reason why we strengthen it is the whole ecosystem depends. For example, I talked to you a little bit. I'll just give you an example. If, in fact, the crustaceans along the rivers aren't there and they can't eat other species that are there and they then can't get eaten by the fish and so on, it's a whole chain. If you interrupt that chain, then in fact what happens is you don't just kill that species, you kill other species. So the Endangered Species Act is overwhelmingly critically important for all species, including the human species. And so way back when I was a kid in the United States Senate, I worked very hard on the Endangered Species Act. And one of the things we know about, for example, there's sort of, Mom will explain to us later, there's an old expression, you come from a mining town like Scranton where I was raised, about a canary in a coal mine. Well, what that means is that there's a lot of methane gas and things that are in coal mines, and you put canaries down there because you don't hear the canaries chirping away. It means the methane kills them. You can't smell it. You don't know what it is. So there's a canary in a coal mine idea. But there's a lot of canaries out there, figuratively speaking, for you adults. And it impacts the entire ecosystem and the entire food chain, for real. Look what's happening now. You have, with global warming, you ever go north here in your magnificent state? I was just out in Idaho as well. All those beautiful green, tall evergreens. They're kind of getting brown, aren't they? Well, why are they getting brown? Well, not just because it's getting hotter up there, because you have beetles and species now that are eating up that material, the green. They're going to kill all of that. That fauna and flora. So the point I'm making is it's all connected. This guy thinks everything can be sort of segregated, like he wants to segregate people. And back to your question, ma'am, immediately what I would do is I would get rid of all the cages, no family separation, no, I mean it. And actually send an immigration bill to the United States Congress today for a path for citizenship for the 11 million undocumented, as well as making sure that DACA children are American citizens. They are already there. And I would not be deporting anybody other than arresting them for any reason other than the commission of a felony in this country, a felony. And I would not have the people who go back to school be the ICE agents. You would not be able to hang out outside, and I mean this sincerely, outside of doctors' offices, outside of Mass on Sunday, arresting people coming out. The carnage that is occurring and the mental illness and the anxiety created by all those children worrying they're going home and their parents not going to be there. They're going to walk out of church and the mom's going to be arrested because she's undocumented. Look, folks, right now, and I'll end with this. I really will end with this. You have so many good questions, though. I'm embarrassed to leave you without answering them all. But here's the deal. Right now, for those of you who are worried about immigration and all the stuff you heard about, this guy is just, think what he did in 2018. He kept showing the invasion is coming. The invasion of these rapist Mexicans, the invasion of all these folks coming from Central America. At the same time, he cut off the $740 billion I was able to get Republicans to vote for to make sure that, in fact, we changed the circumstance on the ground so people didn't want to leave in the first place. They leave for a reason. But here's the deal. If you think about it, where we are now is that you have so many people in grades kindergarten through 12th grade throughout the United States of America. 24 out of every 100 students is Hispanic, is a Latino. 24 out of every 100 students. Now, I don't care whether you have a prejudice or not. If you don't think it's an overwhelming interest of the United States of America for everybody to see to it they're educated and integrated into society, if you don't think that makes sense, then you are, as my mother would say, biting your nose off to spite your face. It's ridiculous. We should be investing. I wrote an article for Atlantic about what was going on about having to restore the soul of America. and why things were in such bad shape in America. Well, a guy I became friends with wrote a book about the soul of America, and a bestseller. Yes, John Meacham. And when I went on the book tour for my son, I spoke to over 84,000 people, and the company wanted me to show up in these cities, and they're large crowds. He interviewed me in one of these. They'd bring in other authors to question me and about the book, ask me about the book. And I talked to Meacham, and he's the one that said, in a great phrase, I thought that what happens is that you could defeat hate. You could defeat prejudice. Because when I was a kid, I came home. I come from a city that is over 60% black, a state that has the 8th highest population of African Americans in America. A total of 19.8% of my state is African American. And it's how I got involved in politics, because I got involved in the civil rights movement as a kid in high school and then college. And when I came home from law school was the year that spring when I graduated was when Dr. King was assassinated, and the only other political hero I ever had was a woman's uncle who just endorsed me, and her name is Kennedy, and Bobby Kennedy. And I came home and I had a job with a white shoe law firm, they called it, the oldest law firm in the state of Delaware. And it was a very prestigious firm. And I was lucky to have gotten the job. But you take the bar exam to become a lawyer in late September, you get admitted in January. Well, what happened was after Dr. King was assassinated, my city was the only city in American history since the Civil War occupied by the military for 10 months with strawn bayonets on every single corner. Just as my wife, the professor, say, Google it. And it's true. And so I realized that I couldn't do what I was doing, even though they were good people, and I quit and became a public defender. And I used to interview people down on Front Street, was an area, anyway, the east side of the town was burned down. If you ever ride up I-95, when you go on the East Coast, you go up I-95, you go through Delaware. That's the reason I-95 is there. That was all burned out. And another part called East Lake. And so I thought things would never, ever, ever get better as I interviewed my clients down there before they would be arraigned. And then I was, 40 years of the month later, standing on that same platform of that railroad station, Amtrak station there, and just waiting for a black man to come 27 miles from Philadelphia to pick me up, while 10,000 people were down below waiting along the tracks to take me to Washington to be sworn in as President and Vice President of the United States. So I called my 3 children up. My son, Bo, who was alive then and was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. My other son, who was heading the World Food Program USA, Hunter Biden. And then my daughter, who's a social worker. And I said, don't tell me things can't get better. I never thought we'd ever be this place. And look, these are the very place I did the interviews. And here I am waiting for Barack Obama, a black man, to pick me up to be sworn in as President and Vice President. And I thought, God, things have changed. But what I didn't realize is, as John Meacham says, hate doesn't go away, it only hides. It hides. It hides under rocks. When I saw those folks coming out, and the reason I decided to run, when I saw those folks coming out of those fields with those torches in Charlottesville, not a joke, my word, I decided, God, and Meacham was right. He talked about it only hiding. And in his book, if you look around page 70, 80, 90, it's in the first third of the book, there's a picture of over 30,000 Ku Klux Klan members in full garb, pointed hats, white dress, all of it, marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in 1924. You know what for? To stop Catholics like me from being able to come to the country, because Catholics are going to pollute the country. A significant influx after the Civil War, after the in the 1850s and 60s, when the famine was in Ireland. You had a significant number of Irish, Italians, Poles, etc. after World War I coming to the United States, because we were going to pollute Christianity. We had to stop. There were then 37 members of the House of Representatives who were open members of the Ku Klux Klan. There were, I believe the number was 7 members of the United States Senate. And Meacham makes the point. We have to all unite. The only way it gets wiped out, it gets back pushed under the rock again, is everybody, every denomination. every denomination, both political parties, was led then by Republican presidents saying this has to stop. We have to stop it again. We have to stop it again because it's happening. This is no president has ever done as overtly what this president has done to try to divide us on race, religion, and ethnicity. We will stop it. God love you all.